She was promised at 21 to bear the heir of the man who once loved her mother. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. At 21, Amina Darzi truly believed she had finally gained the freedom she had always longed for. Raised in the opulence of her family's estate in Riyadh, she had grown up under the weight of a powerful name and traditions that seemed unshakable. Yet her grandfather, Sheikh Idris Darzi, had always held a special affection for her. Perhaps out of respect for the memory of his daughter Selma, who had died tragically when Amina was still a child, and for the mysterious circumstances that had also claimed his son-in-law, he allowed her an international education. Because of that, Amina was not confined to the customs of the old aristocracy. She had attended the finest schools in Europe and was now studying sustainable architecture at Harvard in Boston. She spoke 4 languages fluently and moved easily between London, Paris, and New York. Her small apartment in Cambridge was her sanctuary, a space of her own, surrounded by friends who shared her vision of a more modern and balanced world. Mornings often found her in lively cafes, her notebooks and sketches spread across the table. That day, as she reviewed notes for her thesis defense, her phone buzzed. It was her grandfather calling. Smiling at his name on the screen, she had no idea. That call would change everything she knew. "We need to talk about your future." Sheikh Idris's voice, always warm and full of pride, now sounded strangely serious. Amina tried to respond lightly. "My future is going great, Grandpa. In 2 weeks, I'll defend my thesis, and I already have internship offers in Boston and New York." But his next words cut through her enthusiasm like a blade. "I'm not talking about your career. I'm talking about your duty. You've been promised in marriage." Her world tilted. "Promised? That's insane. We're not living in another century, Grandpa." "To whom?" The answer landed like a punch. "To Rafiq Madavi." The name was widely known, not just in Middle Eastern circles, but across European and American elites as well. A tech mogul whose empire stretched from Dubai to London and across Silicon Valley. A man whose influence shaped markets and governments alike. Amina remembered seeing his face in international news and society pages, impeccably dressed. Commanding, always seen with beautiful women, though none appeared to have a lasting place in his life. He was now 50. She was 21. Her voice faltered. "That can't be true." But her grandfather's reply was unwavering. "This agreement was sealed 16 years ago. This marriage is vital for the stability and honor of our families." Back at her apartment, Amina spent hours at her computer, searching for answers. Everything she found about Rafiq only confirmed what she already knew of him: a cold and ruthless man. Business articles, carefully crafted interviews, global conference appearances. Always composed, private, surrounded by beautiful women who vanished without a trace. What she couldn't grasp was why a man like him would insist on honoring such an old agreement, a pact bound to the past. Deep down, something told her there was much more to the story. Then, late that night, her phone rang again. On the screen appeared a name from her childhood, Samira, the old governess who had raised her. The trembling voice on the other end sent chills down her spine. "Amina, there's something you were never told. Your mother and Rafiq loved each other. Before everything. Before the arranged marriages. Before the alliances of convenience. It was a forbidden love." The words echoed in her mind. Could it be that her mother, Selma Darzi, so surrounded in mystery, had been in love with this man? Questions swirled endlessly. Then why would he want to marry me now? There was a long pause before Samira answered. "Maybe he wants to protect you, or maybe he's trying to reclaim something he lost." The call ended, leaving Amina in emotional turmoil. She wasn't just some young woman promised by an outdated agreement. She was the daughter of the woman he had loved and couldn't have. And now, years later, she was being pulled into a game she had never chosen. That night, she paced her tiny apartment, trying to make sense of it all. How could she face a man like Rafik Mahdavi? How could she escape a fate set in motion before she was even born? Deep inside, she knew that only by looking him in the eye could she ever hope to find her answers. But what would she find there? Resentment? Twisted desire? Or a feeling even he might not understand? While doubt consumed Amina, thousands of miles away, inside a sleek, modern palace in the heart of Dubai, Rafik Mahdavi sat in his office surrounded by reports and contracts. His life was a constant stream of numbers, mergers, and decisions that rippled far beyond his own empire. But that night carried a different weight. As he did each year, he opened a small golden locket. Inside, a photograph of a smiling young woman, Selma, the only woman he had truly loved. Since the accident that had taken her from him, Rafik had built walls around his heart. He had become a man feared and respected, one many believed incapable of loving again. But an old promise, written in ink and sealed in blood, remained. Now, Selma's daughter was entering his life. And Rafik knew, with painful clarity, that no other challenge would be as dangerous as facing the reflection of his lost love in Amina's eyes. The next morning at the Darzi family palace, Sheikh Idris formally announced to ambassadors and advisors that the old agreement would be honored. Rafik had already given his consent. The documents were in the hands of attorneys, awaiting only the formality of a meeting between the betrothed. For Amina, time had become a prison. The two worlds she had managed to keep apart, her free life in Boston and the suffocating past of her lineage, were colliding in the harshest way. She was no longer the bright young architecture student preparing her thesis at Harvard. She was now a promised bride, pulled into restoring alliances and healing family wounds. But inside her, a fierce determination was growing. She would not be a passive victim. She would not accept this fate without a fight. And when she finally faced Rafik Mahdavi, she would make sure to tell him so, looking straight into the eyes of the man who had chosen her future without ever asking. The days that followed that phone call were a wind. Her grandfather's calls became nearly daily, urging Amina to return to Riyadh immediately. Messages from uncles and emails from the family's lawyers flooded her inbox. Contracts, dates, terms, everything written as if she were just a pending signature on a corporate agreement. Amina tried to stay focused on her thesis defense, but her world had already shifted. Conversations with classmates felt empty, and her smile had lost its ease. At night, sleep eluded her. She tossed and turned, haunted by the image of Rafik Mahdavi, a man she knew only through photos and headlines. News of the impending alliance spread quickly. Gulf newspapers and online portals ran bold headlines. Historic alliance between the Darzi and Mahdavi families nearing formalization. Marriage of Amina Darzi to tech magnate sparks hoax for dynastic stability. Her life had been reduced to a public spectacle, a pawn in a power game, without her voice ever being heard. Until one afternoon, a new message arrived. Her meeting with Rafik was scheduled in 1 week. In Dubai, the news hit her like a blow. Dubai. There was no way to refuse now. Her grandfather had been firm. She would travel under the escort of 2 uncles, with every detail arranged. Her presence was expected, with respect and composure. It's just a formal meeting, they told her. But Amina knew it would be far more than that. On the flight to Dubai, she could hardly concentrate on the book she had brought to pass. The time, she tried rehearsing what she might say, but every sentence felt hollow in the face of the situation. Upon landing, she was greeted by an official delegation from the Mahdavi family. The city, with its metallic glow and glass and steel towers rising into the sky, felt oppressive. In the car headed to the palace, her fingers clenched involuntarily around the fabric of her dress. She had no idea what awaited her. Vengeance? Indifference? Or something even more unexpected and dangerous? Rafiq's palace bore no resemblance to her childhood memories of Riyadh. There was no heavy tradition here. It was a space that masterfully blended respect for heritage with bold, contemporary aesthetics. Striking architectural lines, hanging gardens, pools of crystal-clear water. Every detail radiated power and refinement. Led by her uncles through long marble and glass corridors, Amina's heart pounded with every step. In the grand hall, the meeting was about to begin. She raised her chin, her gaze steady, her body alert. And then he appeared. Rafiq Mahdavi. Tall, commanding, with dark, unreadable eyes. The man who had built an empire with his own hands. In that moment, Amina felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was a sudden, sharp need to understand who this man truly was beneath the legend. Rafiq walked toward her with deliberate steps, eyes locked on hers. For an instant, everything around them seemed to fade. When he stopped just a few feet away, his gaze shifted. It wasn't the cold stare of a businessman. There was something deeper there. Recognition. Memory. As though he were seeing a ghost from the past. As though, for one fleeting moment, Selma stood before him, alive. Silence hung in the air. It was Rafiq who spoke first. Amina Darzi. His voice was deep and controlled. "I see that time has fulfilled its promise," Amina answered firmly. "I am here out of respect, not submission. I am here out of respect, not submission. I am here out of respect, not submit." Her words echoed through the hall, surprising even her uncles. Rafiq didn't respond with anger. He simply watched her, as if contemplating a puzzle. "You have her spirit," he murmured. A shiver ran down Amina's spine. The weight of those words carried far more meaning than any formal ceremony. The rest of the meeting unfolded. With stiff formalities, family representatives read terms and clauses, praised the importance of the alliance and ancestral honor. But to Amina, the words became background noise. Her gaze kept returning to Rafiq, and his, when it met hers, held an intensity that unsettled her. There was no coldness, no overt desire. It was a visible conflict, an internal struggle. When the meeting ended and they prepared to part, Rafiq stepped closer. In a low voice meant only for her, he said, "I do not want you to fear me, nor do I expect you to love me, but I cannot pretend that I do not want you here." Those simple words, charged with unspoken tension, stayed with her. During the flight back to Boston, they echoed relentlessly in her mind. And one thing had become clear. Nothing would be simple from this point forward. In the days that followed, Amina felt torn between two worlds. At Harvard, she was the diligent student, preparing for a promising career. But across international news outlets, her name splashed across headlines about the impending marriage. Messages from acquaintances and friends poured in, filled with curiosity and unsolicited advice. With each passing day, the noose tightened. Soon, she would have to face the destiny that had been forced upon her once again. But inside her, a new determination was building. She would not be a passive pawn in this game of alliances and ambition. And the next time she looked into Rafiq Mahdavi's eyes, she would have much more to say. The weeks that followed her encounter in Dubai felt like a siege. With each passing day, Amina received relentless calls from her grandfather, insistent messages from her uncles, formal documents from the family's lawyers that spelled out, with almost cruel precision, every detail of the agreement. It was as if they were trying to suffocate her with the inevitability of a fate she could not escape. At the university, she struggled to keep up appearances. She presented and successfully defended her thesis, earning sincere praise from professors. and classmates, but something had changed. The spark in her eyes, the lightness in her smile were gone. Whenever she went out with friends, she felt out of place, as though living on a countdown to a moment she did not want to face. Social media had become a minefield. Headlines and images from her Dubai meeting were everywhere, introducing her as the future wife of one of the Middle East's most powerful men. Every like, every comment was a painful reminder that her life was being shaped by others without her consent. One lonely night, sitting in her quiet apartment, she opened her mother's old journal. Searching for answers, she found only the empty ache of absence. Deep down, she knew her mother would never have allowed her to be reduced to a pawn in a transaction, but her grandfather left no room for alternatives. Soon after, the wedding date was announced. September, 3 months away. A grand ceremony in Dubai, as required by the traditions of the region's most powerful families. Amina was furious. She tried to argue, threatened to renounce the family name, to run away and disappear. But then the threats began subtle, heavy. They spoke of her cousins, her uncle's businesses, the honor of the clan. "You don't understand the gravity. 2 empires depend on this," they said. With every attempt at resistance, the net closed tighter around her. One desperate night, a new piece of the truth emerged. Samira, the former governess, called again. "Your mother knew this would happen. She tried to stop it. But after her death, and your father's, your grandfather finalized the agreement with the Madhavis." Her voice shaking, Amina asked through tears, "And why did Rafiq agree? Why does he still insist on this?" Samira's whispered reply was heavy with sorrow. "He loved her, and maybe he never stopped. In you, he sees what he lost." That revelation only deepened the storm within Amina. The weeks leading up to the wedding were filled with sleepless nights and endless anxiety. Every detail of the event was being decided without her input. The dress, the venue, the guest list. Was as if her life had been taken from her and turned into a spectacle for interests that had nothing to do with her desires. Many nights, she wandered alone through her apartment, trying to imagine a way to regain control of her future. But she knew that soon she would once again be face to face with Rafiq, and deep down, she feared that meeting. Feared what she would feel. Feared what she would discover. The preparations for the wedding took on surreal proportions. Renowned designers from Paris and Milan filled the palace halls. Jewelers presented priceless pieces. Fashion magazines vied for exclusive coverage of the event. But for Amina, it all tasted bitter. She felt like a doll being carefully dressed for display. No one asked what she wanted. They simply informed her of what had been decided. With each fitting, each ceremonial rehearsal, her resentment grew. It was during one of those long afternoons that something unexpected happened. Rafiq appeared unannounced. She was in the fitting room, surrounded by fabrics, seamstresses, and advisors. When she saw him standing in the doorway, her heart raced. His gaze was different, carrying something she couldn't quite read. It wasn't cold. It wasn't arrogant. There was a shadow of something deeper. When he approached and they were alone, he spoke, his voice controlled but tinged with an old weariness. "I do not wish for you to feel forced. But this marriage will happen. It is what the families expect, and something I can no longer prevent." Amina's reply came from the depths of her accumulated anguish. "Then tell me, why you accept this? Is it politics, pride, or something you yourself can't explain?" For a brief moment, Rafiq met her gaze, and the mask of control he wore so skillfully faltered. "It is not for you to carry the past," he said, but his voice betrayed a lack of conviction. Amina sensed there was more beneath the surface, far more than he was letting on, and in that moment, something shifted inside her. She no longer saw him only as the man trapping her in an unwanted marriage. She began to see a man in conflict, perhaps just as much a prisoner of this story as she was. Against her will, against all logic, a part of her wanted to understand who Rafik Mahdavi really was behind the facade of a magnate. And that desire, she knew, might prove even more dangerous than the marriage itself. The following days were a relentless whirlwind. Between rehearsals, protocol meetings, and pre-ceremonial events, Amina found herself increasingly immersed in the Mahdavi world. The palace, the distinguished guests arriving from across the globe, the heavy traditions that seemed to linger over everything. But inside, her restlessness only grew. She felt that a storm was brewing, not only around her, but between her and Rafik, an unresolved tension that no designer gown or diplomatic ceremony could mask. And deep down, she knew the real confrontation was yet to come. Because before the altar, before the exchange of rings, there were questions that needed answers, and feelings that, no matter how hard they tried to hide, could no longer be ignored. The wedding took place on a golden September morning. The Dubai sky was clear at dawn, already carrying the warmth that would fill the streets and palace halls well before noon. The city was brimming with anticipation for what the media had dubbed the wedding of the century. Heads of state, tycoons, heirs to dynasties from the Middle East, Europe, and Asia arrived by private jet every hour. Inside the Mahdavi palace, the activity was constant. Hairdressers, makeup artists, designers, and event planners moved swiftly through the halls. But amid all the excitement, Amina felt only an overwhelming emptiness. Sitting before a mirror, in a lavishly decorated room, dressed in the gown that had once belonged to her mother, she could hardly recognize herself. The golden silk, the heirloom jewelry, the elaborate hairstyle, it all seemed to belong to someone else. It was as though her life had been stolen, transformed into a spectacle for the world to watch. When she looked into the mirror, she saw a flawless bride. But deep down, she wasn't the idealistic architect dreaming of sustainable cities. She was a prisoner, bound to alliances she had never wanted. The ceremony was every bit as grand as promised. The main hall, adorned with rare flowers flown in from around the world, echoed with music from world-renowned performers. Cameras broadcast the event live across global networks. Influential guests filled the space. But for Amina, each step toward the altar felt like a point of no return. In the center of the hall, Rafik Mahdavi stood waiting. His presence commanded respect, impeccable in traditional attire, his posture steady, his gaze stern and controlled. Yet when his eyes met hers, Amina noticed something that caught her off guard. There was no arrogance, no cold detachment she had expected. There was a depth to his gaze, something he himself seemed unwilling to acknowledge. The vows were exchanged, mechanically, recited like rituals drained of any real emotion. When the ceremony was finally sealed, Rafik lifted her veil with an unexpected gentleness. Leaning in, he murmured in a low, steady voice, "As I told you, I will never force you into anything. But I will not pretend I don't want you here." Those simple yet intense words echoed inside her in a way she could not explain. The reception lasted well into the early morning hours. Amina was introduced to heads of state, business leaders, and members of the world's most powerful families. She smiled, accepted greetings and compliments with grace. Outwardly, she remained composed, but inside she felt suffocated. Each glance, each polite exchange, reinforced the role that had been imposed upon her, a valuable piece in a high-stakes game of power and influence. When they finally left the reception hall, Rafik led her back to the palace. They walked through long, softly lit corridors. Upon reaching the door of a luxurious suite overlooking the suspended gardens, he stopped. "This will be your space. You'll have complete privacy here. My room is in another wing." Amina looked at him in surprise. Before she could respond, he added with a tone that left no room for doubt, "Until you decide otherwise." And with that, he left her alone, enveloped in a silence heavier than all the gold and jewels of that night. The first months that followed were a strange balance between public appearances and private distance. In public, they were the perfect couple, appearing together at official events, diplomatic dinners, and high-profile receptions. Amina played her role with elegance, just as was expected. But within the palace walls, they were strangers. She remained in her quarters, filling her days however she could. Rafiq kept his usual routine, leaving early, returning late, often not coming back at all. When he was at the palace, he stayed locked in his office, surrounded by documents and video meetings. The frequent absences soon sparked rumors. Celebrity magazines speculated about possible mistresses, secret trips, mysterious meetings. Amina noticed the signs: unfamiliar perfumes, whispered phone calls, faint marks on his shirt collars. She tried to convince herself that none of it mattered. But deep inside, something was stirring. It wasn't pride. It wasn't about the role imposed on her. It was a new, uncontrollable feeling. One night, unable to bear the turmoil inside her any longer, Amina went to Rafiq's office. She found him surrounded by papers, a glass of whiskey resting on the desk. The words escaped her before she could stop them. "What kind of marriage is this?" He looked up, weary. "The kind you chose when you refused to share my room." The cunning response hurt more than she expected. "You're the one who put me in another wing," she replied, her voice heavy with emotion. Rafiq stood slowly, a sharp intensity in his gaze that made her instinctively step back. "To protect you from me." The words slipped out, revealing what he had tried so hard to hide. And in that moment, something within Amina broke. Behind the cold facade, beneath the distant exterior, there was a man at war with himself. And despite everything, part of her, against logic, against reason, began to want to understand who Rafiq Mahdavi really was. The weeks that followed were marked by growing tension. At official dinners, the glances they exchanged spoke louder than words. In the palace, even passing each other in the halls made the air feel charged. Amina sensed that Rafiq was trying to maintain distance. But she also knew he watched her, even when pretending otherwise. And despite all her anger and resentment, something inside her was growing stronger, a desire that was becoming impossible to deny, a desire to break through the wall that separated them, to discover the man hidden beneath that armor, and perhaps to reclaim something she had once thought lost: control over her own destiny. The months that followed were marked by a delicate balance, held together almost entirely by appearances. In public, Amina and Rafiq projected the image of a perfectly respectable, united couple. They were seen together at corporate events, diplomatic receptions, and high-level investor dinners. Every appearance was captured by the cameras, closely followed by international media, eager for any detail. To the outside world, the marriage appeared solid, a true symbol of success and tradition. But behind the palace walls, reality looked very different. Rafiq maintained his strict routine, immersed in the business dealings that consumed both his days and nights. Endless meetings, frequent travel, unmissable obligations. It was rare for them to dine together. When their paths did cross, the exchanges were polite, the conversations brief and formal. He treated her with unwavering respect and courtesy, but nothing beyond that. During the day, Amina tried to fill her time with personal projects. She buried herself in studies on sustainable architecture, read articles, exchanged messages with former classmates. She clung to a routine that gave her some sense of purpose. But with each passing week, the emptiness inside her grew. The marriage provided nothing more than a tidal dot in time. Amina's view of Rafiq began to shift. It wasn't idle curiosity that drove her, but a growing need to understand who this man truly was, the man with whom she now shared a life. She paid attention to the small details others overlooked. The way he focused intently on his documents, the tension in his posture. After grueling meetings, the moments when he seemed lost in thought, staring beyond the palace walls. Rafik remained an enigma. Whenever she tried to find a way in, he would shut down at the first sign of anything personal. If this had been nothing more than a political marriage, Amina could have accepted it more easily. But there was more. Something in his gaze betrayed. A constant restlessness, a weariness that didn't come from work alone. She began to realize that the marriage seemed to weigh on him almost as heavily as it did on her. And this stirred conflicting emotions within her, emotions she wasn't sure how to manage. One night, while returning from the palace library, Amina heard voices coming from one of the meeting rooms. The door was ajar, and fragments of the conversation drifted out. She recognized Rafik's voice and that of one of her grandfather's closest advisors. The subject was clear. Expectations for an heir. The words were harsh. 6 months of marriage, plenty of time for an heir to have been conceived. The balance between the families depended on it. Amina's stomach turned. She wasn't simply a wife. She was a pawn in a game of alliances, a vessel meant to fulfill a predetermined role. She climbed the stairs back to her quarters with heavy steps, her heart burning. It wasn't anger toward Rafik in particular. It was anger at all of it. The web of expectations being imposed on her body and her future. She refused to be defined by that. She refused to be reduced to a function dot. It was a long night. Alone in her room, lying in bed, she stared at the ceiling, searching for a way out. But there were few options. Escape was impossible. The families were too powerful. Breaking the marriage publicly would have devastating consequences for everyone involved. All that remained was to confront the situation head-on. The next day, she resolved to speak with Rafik. She went to his office, more determined than she had felt in a long time. As always, he was surrounded by towering stacks of documents. When he saw her, a flicker of surprise crossed his face. But he said nothing. Amina didn't hesitate. I want to understand what my role really is in this marriage. Hearing behind closed doors what's expected of me is something I will not tolerate. For a long moment, Rafik was silent. Then he answered, his voice lower than usual. If you think this is easy for me, you're mistaken. I no longer control everything as I once did, but I won't force you into any role you don't choose. His unexpected honesty unsettled her. It wasn't the answer she had anticipated. For a moment, the cold, distant man so many feared seemed to vanish. In his place was someone caught between the weight of the past and the demands of a present he could no longer fully command. The silence that followed was dense but revealing. Amina realized that Rafik's defenses were not unbreakable. She knew that crossing them would take time and patience. She left his office with more questions than answers. But something had shifted. In the days that followed, she began to notice small changes. Rafik started appearing more often at palace dinners. Their conversations began to take on more substance, even if they remained somewhat formal. And little by little, Amina came to understand that the man she had married was not as impenetrable as he seemed. One evening, after a dinner with a group of European investors, Rafik invited her for a walk through the palace gardens. They strolled side by side under Dubai's clear sky. The conversation was light, almost casual. They talked about architecture, about the projects Amina followed with such passion. Rafik listened attentively, asked questions, and responded thoughtfully. For the first time, Amina sensed there was room for genuine dialogue, not as husband and wife in the traditional sense, but as two people gradually getting to know each other. And when the walk ended, The look Rafik gave her remained etched in her memory. It was a gaze filled with respect, curiosity, and a feeling that even he seemed unready to admit. The days that followed brought a more stable rhythm to Amina's daily life. Over time, she began to divide her hours between reading, architectural projects, and the social obligations that now came with her title. She attended events at Rafik's side, accompanied him to diplomatic meetings and business conferences. Gradually, she noticed his presence beside her becoming more frequent, less driven by mere protocol. On the rare nights when they dined alone, she sensed a genuine effort from him to listen, to better understand her ideas and interests. The distance between them still lingered, but something had changed. Rafik's gaze was no longer that of a man merely fulfilling an agreement. And within herself, Amina felt shifts as well. She could no longer deny her growing desire to know who he was beyond the public image. This curiosity made every encounter between them feel more significant. One afternoon, as she sat reading in the palace garden, an unexpected conversation unfolded. Rafik had returned early from a meeting and found her beneath a row of palms. Without formality, he sat beside her. For several minutes, they shared a comfortable silence. Then, he asked directly, "Do you miss home?" The sincerity of the question caught her off guard. "I miss the freedom to choose," she replied honestly, "to decide my own path." Rafik looked toward the horizon and said, "So do I, in many ways." The simple confession, weighted with meaning, hung in the air. In that moment, Amina sensed something falling away between them. There was a vulnerability in Rafik she hadn't expected to see. And from that moment on, a new understanding began to take shape between them. As the weeks passed, these conversations became more frequent. Sometimes during dinners, sometimes during walks in the gardens, or in quiet moments between obligations. Rafik began to open up about his childhood, about the difficult years spent building the empire he now led. He shared stories of failures, triumphs, and losses that had left lasting marks. Though he never spoke directly of Selma, Amina's mother, her presence was felt in the pauses and the silences that punctuated his words. In turn, Amina spoke passionately about her studies, her architectural visions, her dream of designing cities that were more humane and sustainable. Through these exchanges, she realized they were starting to see each other as people, not merely as figures in an imposed arrangement, but as two individuals trying, in their own ways, to connect. One evening, in particular, remained vivid in Amina's memory. After a meeting with representatives from an international foundation, Rafik invited her to a more informal dinner on one of the palace terraces. The illuminated cityscape was breathtaking. They talked for hours, the tone light, at times even playful. When Amina spoke about a vertical garden project she had been researching, Rafik showed genuine interest. He asked questions, suggested contacts who might be helpful. At the end of the evening, as they parted, Amina noticed him hesitate, as though wanting to say something but unsure how. In place of words, it was his gaze that spoke. A look filled with respect and growing admiration, now harder for him to conceal. This shift didn't go unnoticed among the families. Whispers began to circulate. Some of Amina's uncles expressed satisfaction at the couple's apparent closeness. Meanwhile, Rafik's advisors watched with discreet caution. The pressure for an heir, however, had not lessened. The topic continued to arise in meetings and behind closed doors. Yet Rafik remained steadfast. Nothing would be forced. Amina knew he faced pressures as great as her own. This shared understanding fostered a new kind of bond between them. Not yet love, nor full intimacy, but a subtle alliance, built on mutual respect that deepened with each passing day. Embracing this new phase, Amina also allowed herself small changes. She began to explore more of the palace, rekindled connections with old friends from Europe, and returned to sketching more often. She rediscovered joy in activities that had once seemed empty. And without realizing it, these small shifts increasingly drew Rafik's attention. He watched her more often, followed her progress, showed an interest that went far beyond social obligations. In turn, Amina began to see a man far more complex than she had imagined at the start. A more human figure, full of layers and contradictions. Each new gesture, each exchanged word, quietly deepened a growing understanding between them, one neither of them had anticipated. As the months passed, the relationship between Amina and Rafik reached a subtle, unexpected balance. It wasn't yet a marriage in the full sense of the word, but there was an understanding between them that deepened with each passing day. Around the palace, their routines began to intertwine more naturally. It was no longer unusual for them to meet for coffee in the gardens or to exchange a few words at the end of a long day. Their conversations flowed with greater ease. Rafik, always so reserved, showed a genuine interest in Amina's opinions. And in turn, she began to see that the man behind the powerful facade wasn't made up only of ambition and control. There were layers to him that few ever glimpsed, facets he rarely allowed to surface. In public appearances, this growing sense of connection was becoming visible. Astute journalists picked up on the exchanged glances and subtle gestures that now revealed a mutual respect and admiration that could no longer be hidden. It was during an autumn afternoon, at a charity event in Abu Dhabi, that a new chapter quietly began to take shape. Rafik and Amina had been invited to an intimate dinner with some of the Arab world's most prominent philanthropists. When the conversation turned toward urban development and sustainability, Amina shared her ideas about architecture applied to social projects. She spoke with such clarity and passion that the entire table was captivated. Sitting beside her, Rafik listened attentively and, at the right moment, publicly praised the value of her ideas. On the way back to the palace, a comfortable silence filled the car. Then Rafik spoke. "You have a vision few can see." The May words, so direct and unexpected, warmed Amina's heart. It was the first time he had expressed admiration so openly. And in that moment, something within her opened even further. In the days that followed, Rafik began including Amina in more strategic discussions. Whenever a new construction project or real estate initiative arose, he would ask for her opinion. What began as a surprise for her quickly turned into genuine enthusiasm. It was an area where she felt at home. More than that, it was a space where she could stand beside him on her own merits. Rafik seemed sincerely interested in what she had to say. These exchanges brought a new dynamic to their interactions. The tension that had once existed gave way to a more fluid foundation, where intellectual respect began to blend with something more personal. Amina could sense it, not just in words, but in gestures and glances. There was a new softness in the way Rafik treated her, a careful attentiveness that hadn't been there before. And with that, the feeling she had been trying to contain began to grow, almost inevitably. It was during one especially warm evening, over a private dinner on the palace terrace, that the atmosphere between them shifted for good. The meal had ended, and their conversation drifted toward future projects. The tone was light, relaxed, but filled with a growing intimacy. At one point, as Rafik poured her one last glass of wine, his fingers brushed lightly against hers. The touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent Amina's heart racing. And as she met his eyes, she saw that he had felt it too. For a moment, both sat in silence, unsure of how to navigate what had just passed between them. Rafik was the first to recover, steering the conversation back to safer ground. But the moment lingered, etched in her memory. That night, as she lay awake, Amina knew something between them had changed. From that point on, their behavior toward each other began to take on new layers. There was greater care in their gestures, more intention in their glances. Their conversations deepened. No longer limited to business or public affairs, they began to share memories, thoughts, reflections on their past and their hopes for the future. Rafik started speaking about moments from his youth stories he had never shared with anyone. And though he still avoided direct mention of Selma, it was clear that the wounds of that lost love still ran deep. Amina never forced the subject. She understood that some truths had to emerge in their own time. This patience fostered a growing trust between them, one that was taking root gradually, yet with unmistakable strength at the start of winter. During a dinner at the palace with a group of international architects, Amina presented a new concept for an eco-city. Rafik followed her presentation with interest, asked thoughtful questions, and at the end, praised her work in front of everyone. It wasn't a mere gesture of politeness. The look he gave her, steady, full of pride, spoke volumes. It was both a public acknowledgement and a personal one. Later that evening, when they found themselves alone in the palace gardens, he simply said, "You surprise me more with each passing day." And the smile Amina returned was genuine, born from a feeling. She was finally beginning to understand more clearly. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to the way Amina and Rafik interacted. What had once been a cold relationship, built on formalities and distance, was slowly becoming something more natural, more spontaneous. Their chance meetings in the palace gardens or corridors were now happening more often, lingering beyond polite greetings. During their private dinners, conversations flowed with an ease and honesty that hadn't been there before. The tension that had once dominated their every interaction was giving way to a subtle connection, built day by day. Amina noticed that Rafik, little by little, was beginning to share more about his life. He spoke of past travels, pivotal decisions, and the constant challenges of maintaining an empire of such magnitude. He was not a man who opened up easily, much less one used to revealing personal thoughts. But with her, a certain openness was emerging. And as this happened, Amina's own feelings began to shift. It was no longer just respect or curiosity. It was admiration, growing with every gesture, with every word, revealing a side of Rafik few had ever seen. During a private dinner with a group of international investors, one particular moment left a lasting impression on Amina. Introduced as the lead architect on a new urban revitalization project, she spoke with confidence and passion. Seated beside her, Rafik made a point of highlighting her intelligence and innovative vision to those present. His words, spoken with both sincerity and ease, drew surprised and respectful looks from everyone at the table. Amina felt a quiet pride, but more than that, a new confidence in herself. Later, as they walked together to the car, Rafik remarked, "You're no longer the young woman I saw arrive here months ago. You're leaving your mark." The warmth in his tone, more personal than she had ever heard from him, stirred something deep within her. It was the kind of acknowledgement no title or gift could match. Each day, the exchanges between them seemed to carry new meaning. Glances lingered a bit longer. Casual touches held a subtle, unspoken intention. This wasn't some abrupt or forced change. It was happening naturally, nurtured by their growing connection and mutual respect. Rafik remained a man of great self-control, yet there were moments when his defenses would falter. When they spoke about architecture, about the future, or about projects they both admired, the barriers between them seemed to dissolve. And Amina, always observant, noticed these nuances. The man who had once seemed distant and intimidating now revealed more of his complexity, his hidden vulnerabilities, in ways that moved her in ways she couldn't quite explain. One particularly warm night, after a dinner on the palace terrace, Amina noticed that Rafik seemed restless. They talked casually for a while until he fell silent, gazing out at the glowing lights of Dubai. After a long pause, he quietly murmured, "There are things from the past that still weigh on me." things I'm not sure I'll ever be able to fully share. Amina didn't press. With calm reassurance, she answered, "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here." The look he gave her then was more telling than any words. It was a moment of trust, a sign of a bond that was quietly deepening between them. That night, as she returned to her room, Amina couldn't shake the feeling that something between them had truly shifted. In the days that followed, Amina began to include Rafik more naturally in her activities. She would invite him to view her project sketches, share interesting articles, or discuss current events in the world of architecture. His responses were always attentive, often more engaged than she expected. A new space began to open between them, not simply as husband and wife bound by an arrangement, but as partners sharing ideas and a vision for the future. This foundation, though still unspoken, was solid. And with each passing day, Amina realized that her place there was no longer that of a promised bride. She was a woman who had earned her own place, her own worth. And this realization made her see Rafik in an entirely new light. One afternoon, after returning from a visit to a new construction site, Amina found Rafik in the library. He was reading an old book on architecture. When he saw her, he smiled in that rare way of his, subtle yet genuine. Without much thought, she approached and began speaking about the project. Their conversation flowed easily, without formality or barriers. And in that moment, surrounded by books and shared ideas, Amina felt something solidifying between them. It was no longer an imposed coexistence. It was a relationship being built on respect, admiration, and something deeper something. Neither of them seemed quite ready to name. The weeks leading up to the end of the year brought a faster, more intense rhythm to life at the palace. Meetings piled up, and international negotiations kept Rafik in constant motion. Despite an increasingly demanding schedule, he always made time for small moments with Amina. These moments weren't planned or performed out of obligation. They happened naturally. A glance in the hallway, a quiet exchange in the garden, a quick conversation before an important meeting. Between them, there was now an ease that required no explanation, a silent understanding that grew in the midst of their busy days. Amina noticed that Rafik sought her out more often, as if her presence had become a quiet refuge for him amid the pressures he faced. And with each passing day, a new feeling was taking root inside her. It was no longer just respect or admiration. It was a genuine desire to be at his side, to share not only moments, but a life. One afternoon, after a meeting with a group of international urban planners, Rafik invited Amina to visit one of the city's most innovative projects in development. The project blended cutting-edge technology with sustainable solutions, exactly the kind of subject that had always fueled Amina's passion. They walked together through the unfinished spaces, exchanging ideas and impressions. Rafik listened attentively, valuing each of her comments, and more than once seemed surprised by her perspective. At the end of the visit, as they returned to the car, a simple gesture stayed in Amina's mind. Without a word, Rafik extended his hand to help her up. The touch was brief, almost casual, but it carried an unexpected intimacy. In that moment, Amina realized something clearly. The man before her was no longer the one who had forced her into an arranged marriage. He was someone she truly wanted to know. In the weeks that followed, their encounters became more frequent. Dinners for two were no longer the exception. Their conversations grew deeper, more meaningful, and often, the silences they shared spoke louder than words. Amina sensed subtle changes in Rafik. There was less rigidity in his movements, a new softness in his voice, a gaze that lingered just a little longer each time it met hers. She, too, was changing, no longer fighting the feelings that had steadily grown. She allowed herself to feel with a clarity that came from daily moments, from a respect built over time. And with that, what once had felt like a prison was slowly becoming something she wanted, a future she could choose for herself. During a dinner on the palace terrace, beneath a crisp, clear winter sky, their conversation took an unexpectedly personal turn. They spoke of losses, of life choices that had shaped them. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Rafik confessed the difficulty of balancing power and loneliness. Amina listened intently, never interrupting. And when she finally replied, it was with an honesty that struck deep. The hardest part isn't being alone. It's feeling alone even when you're surrounded by people. Rafik stared at her in silence for a long moment. He didn't respond with words, but the look in his eyes said enough. There was something between them that was growing stronger by the day, just as her own feelings were. And in that moment, with glasses of wine and shared confidences, more of the distance between them quietly dissolved. Those closest to the couple had begun to notice the change. Glances, gestures, and a new lightness in their interactions didn't go unnoticed. Comments circulated discreetly, but neither Rafik nor Amina paid them any mind. What mattered between them was the sincerity of what they were building. Day by day, their meetings became more intimate. They would talk late into the night, sharing books, films, and ideas. There was no rush, no pressure. The connection grew naturally, driven by a mutual desire to be together. And what had once seemed impossible was taking on a clearer, undeniable shape. Amina knew her feelings were real, and with time, it was just as clear that Rafik was allowing himself to feel as well, even if he hadn't yet spoken the words. On a cold winter morning, while having coffee in the palace garden, Amina spoke about a new sustainable housing project gaining attention in Europe. Rafik listened with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and suggested helpful contacts. At the end of their conversation, as they stood to leave, he lightly touched her arm, holding it just a moment longer than necessary. His eyes met hers, and in that brief moment, nothing needed to be said. It was clear. What existed between them was no longer tentative. It was something quietly powerful, growing stronger with every glance, every word, every touch. As the new year approached, the atmosphere inside the palace felt different. It wasn't just the usual rush of festivities or the diplomatic obligations that came with the season. There was a deeper shift, one only Amina and Rafik could truly feel. The bond between them had grown stronger, more present in their everyday life. No one spoke any more of agreements, heirs, or family alliances. In the glances they exchanged, in the conversations that stretched into the evenings, in the small gestures shared in the routine of each day, there was a feeling that could no longer be denied. Amina felt increasingly at ease around Rafik, and he, in turn, had become more attentive, more open. The relationship they were building rested on something real now, far removed from the expectations and pressures that had once defined it. And for both of them, that changed everything. It was on a quiet evening, after a private dinner on the palace terrace, that something finally broke open. The conversation had been light, filled with smiles and genuine exchanges. As they said, "Good night," Rafik hesitated. He fell silent for a moment, looking directly into Amina's eyes. Then, in a voice full of sincerity, he said, "I don't want you to feel like you were brought here out of obligation. I want you to know that too. Me, you are so much more." The words, simple but deeply meaningful, touched Amina in a way she hadn't expected. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer, gently took his hand, letting her gestures speak for her. In that moment, Rafik pulled her softly toward him, closing the distance between them. The kiss came naturally calm, unhurried, but charged with the emotion they had both held back for too long. The meeting of their lips was a silent promise, sealing all they had lived through until that point. There were no words, just a long, intense gesture. When they finally parted, Amina kept his hand in hers and, without needing to speak, led him through the quiet corridors to her chambers. There, under the soft glow of the room, they let go of the last of their defenses. The night was one of complete surrender, filled with slow caresses and kisses that spoke louder than any declaration. It was there, in that shared intimacy, that they left the past behind and met one another fully as man and woman did in the days that followed. Their closeness deepened even more. They dined together more often, shared books and ideas, spent long afternoons in the garden or the library. Their conversations flowed with an ease that had once seemed impossible. A lingering touch of the hand, a gaze that held a little longer, an exchanged smile, all of it spoke volumes. Rafik no longer hid how much he enjoyed Amina's company, and she no longer tried to hide how much she wanted to be at his side. Their relationship was evolving through the small rhythms of everyday life. Slowly, what had begun as an arranged marriage was taking on a shape neither of them could have imagined. Just months before it was on a spring afternoon when the news arrived. Amina was in the garden, going over sketches for a new sustainable housing project, when a wave of light nausea came over her. At first, she thought little of it, but as the days passed and the discomfort remained, a visit to the doctor confirmed what, deep down, she had already begun to suspect: she was pregnant. The news stirred a whirlwind of emotions. It wasn't just the fact that she was expecting a child. It was what this moment represented. After everything they had been through, after how far they had come, this baby was not the product of an old agreement. This child was the result of something real, a love built step by step. When she told Rafik, the look in his eyes was filled with emotion, though he tried to contain it. He stepped forward, took her hands in his, and embraced her tightly, a gesture that spoke far more than any words could. There were no grand declarations, just a silent understanding between them that this moment marked a new chapter. From that point on, they were no longer two people bound by the past. They were a couple with a future that was unfolding more each day. The pregnancy brought a new lightness to their lives. Conversations now centered around the baby, on what they hoped to build as a family. And through it all, the bond between Amina and Rafik deepened quietly, naturally. Months later, the birth of their child brought even more joy to their lives. In the hospital, when Rafik first held that small life in his arms, he felt something he had never thought possible. And as he looked at Amina, with their child between them, he realized that everything they had lived through had prepared them for that moment. No longer was theirs a marriage forged from duty or marked by the wounds of the past. It was a story they had rewritten together, shaped by the choices they had made every day. And as they returned home with their child, both of them knew that from then on, what mattered most was the life they would build together as a family. The end. So, what did you think of this story? Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to keep enjoying stories like this one. See you next time!